The question is, do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country?
For me, the principle that we work best when we work together.
Well, they didn't.
Very serious. The referendum. It seems to me that they're not dealing with the issues.
Hello, and welcome to Scottish Independence podcast number 25, and I've been waiting for a good 15 minutes for the fridge to stop making that horrible noise, so that I could record this introduction. I think it's just done it, so this time I spoke to Colin Fox, who is the National Convenor of the Scottish Socialist Party. We had a very good conversation, so we'll just go straight to it, and I'll have a wee word with you at the end. Hello Colin, how's it going?
Hiya Michael, it's great, and how are you?
Not too bad. Wee bit of tech problems there, but we'll sort it out.
No worries.
Okay, so I suppose the first thing I'd like to ask you today is about the Scottish Socialist Party itself and why the party has decided to support independence. And second to that, was it fairly unanimous or was there a great amount of disagreement in the party about that?
Well, the Scottish Socialist Party was founded 15 years ago. Can you believe that? Do I look like a 15-year-old?
Right.
15 years ago, we were unanimous that we were supporting independence for Scotland back then in 1998. And as you know, the Scottish Socialist Party's famous slogan is, "We're for an independent socialist Scotland." And by that we mean we're in favour of a modern democratic republic, which is democratic in the sense that the majority of the people in the country run the country. So, no, I mean, I think the SSP's debated this a long time ago. We were content and happy that that was the right way forward for Scotland, and it's been something we've been working on for the last 15 years.
So it's part of the DNA of the party, if you like.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's part of our red-blooded socialism, part of our DNA. That's right, yeah.
That leads us neatly on to the second thing, because I think it's an important area in this debate, and it comes up very often, this idea that to support independence would be abandoning the working class of England or England and Wales, if you like, to constant Tory rule. I mean, how do you respond to that? Because it's a very common theme that we hear.
Yeah, it's common. It's particularly common in the left of politics in Britain, and it's a debate. It's a perfectly legitimate debate. It's a perfectly reasonable debate. It starts, of course, on the premise that socialists are interested in the advancement of working class people, you know, to throw off the exploitation of capitalism that we all share. And working class people the world over have this unique bond between them all, regardless of your skin colour or your language or your gender or anything like that. You share a common experience, which is that you sell your labour on an hourly basis to pay your bills. If you don't go to work, you don't eat, you don't pay your rent, you don't raise your kids. So that transcends national boundaries. It transcends, as I said, the colour of your skin. So that's really, really important for socialists. That's at the heart of every socialist's DNA. Now, I had the advantage. I lived in London for 10 years. I lived in the East End of London in the borough of Newham, near West Ham's ground. And that's a predominantly Bangladeshi and Pakistani Indian community. And so I've got a strong affinity with those people. I lived amongst them. They were my neighbours in my community. And so the question here is Scotland, in declaring and achieving our independence, abandoning those people to a fate worse than the Tories? Or, as I think the Scottish Socialist Party would put it, no, in actual fact, we're advancing the struggle. We're hoping that Scotland becomes a beacon which others can follow. And I mean, the argument that's often put to us is, well, you know, as a socialist, you're primarily an internationalist, and therefore that's at odds with support for independence. And by the way, I'd never describe myself as a nationalist. I would be a supporter of independence who's also an internationalist. But I know my history, Michael, and John Maclean never seen a problem supporting an independent socialist Scotland. James Connolly never seen a problem with an independent socialist Scotland, you know. Neither of them would ever be considered nationalists, would they?
No, not at all.
It's an honourable tradition that the Scottish Socialist Party protects.
Yeah, and the idea that the English working class would be abandoned, it's in some ways patronising as well. I've always thought, you know, that they wouldn't be able to sort things out for themselves. It's kind of an absurd idea as well.
Yeah, I mean, they don't float off into space when Scotland becomes independent. The other thing about it, I look back in history and I say, you know, socialists in the 1940s Didn't he say to Gandhi in India, well, you can't have your independence from the British Empire because we all need to unite to defeat the British Empire, We didn't say to George Washington in the 1700s, oh, you can't have independence for America because we've all got to fight the common enemy, which is the British Empire. You have to recognise that these struggles for national liberation and for socialism, the class struggle, they're not opponents. They complement one another. It's one and the same struggle. And I consider, Scotland and our fight for independence, we're involved in a struggle, and that's what it is. It's a struggle for national liberation, our right to self-determination, against who, if you look at it, who opposes independence the most fiercely and vociferously? Of course, it's the British ruling classes, the establishment in the City of London, the Bank of England. The rich in Britain are the ones who most fiercely oppose independence for Scotland, and that tells you something.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting point that you just made. Why is it that, independence struggles all around the world can be supported, but Scotland is a special case and must not be supported? All other independence struggles seem to be progressive in this kind of mindset, but the one in Scotland is regressive. I find it quite a strange idea to have.
Well, it is peculiar. I mean, of course, people like Lenin were writing about this a long time ago. In many ways, there's nothing new about this debate and argument. And of course, for socialists, it's important to see who is it that's wanting independence? Who is it that aspires to independence? And in Scotland, it's an easy one. Anybody here can recognise that the greatest support for independence tends to come from the working class, the poorest, the most disenfranchised. So in other words, the struggle for independence is coming from those who have the least best served by the existing economic, social and political structures. It's not the rich, the middle classes, the bosses in Scotland who want independence. There are one or two exceptions, Jim McCall, there's one or two who support independence who are businessmen in Scotland, but the overwhelming majority here who support independence come from the working class, the poor, who feel they've got the most to gain by throwing off the shackles of British imperialism. Clearly, there can be struggles, I accept it, across the world where that would not be the case. But I think in Scotland, it's plainly clear for everybody to see.
Do you think that therein lies a problem? Because although those are the people, and the polls totally back up that these are the people that are most likely to support independence, they're also the people that are least likely to vote. I mean, we had Carolyn Leckie on here a couple of times, and one of the great points that she made was that a lot of people, a lot of working class now aren't on voting registers and things because they're worried about who might find them and things like that. I mean, this could be a problem for the independence movement, the fact that the people that are most likely to support independence are also the least likely to vote.
Well, this is a eureka moment, Michael, because, this is the key to it. People look at the polls and they say to me, Colin, look, yes, Scotland was launched a year ago. We were at 35% support for independence, 45% were against it, and what is that, 15 or so percent hadn't made up their mind, and here we are a year later and it's still the case, right? And I think, for me, I'm confident we'll win this. I look to the next year, and there's two very important things to put your finger on. First of all is there's a worsening recession, ever worsening. People are really toiling here. You know yourself. People are waking up in the wee small hours, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, the dark hours in a sweat, and they're going, how the hell am I going to pay this gas and electric bill? How am I going to cope with the bedroom tax? How am I going to keep paying bills that are going up and up when my wages and my income's going down, and they're waking up in a cold sweat? And all the economists across Britain, regardless of what they say is the solution to the problem, are at least agreed on one thing. This isn't going to end before 2020. There's another 7 years of this nightmare.
Yeah, they just recently said that this is going to continue on through the next Parliament at least.
Yeah, and the headline in one of the papers yesterday said that there's 500,000 people in Britain. I mean, honest to God, you couldn't believe it. But apparently there's a couple of charities that have clubbed together, and they've seen their role as giving out food parcels, tins of beans, packets of cornflakes, packets of rice. 500,000 families in Britain are now being provided by these charities for basic foodstuffs because they no longer can afford it. This is Britain. This is the fourth richest country in the world in the 21st century, and we're dealing with that kind of inequality. So for me, that doesn't not only not go away in the next year, that gets worse and worse and worse, and that plays to the idea that people said, you know what, I'm getting out the road of this train. This recession, it's the worst in Scotland and Britain for 80 years. I'm getting out of the way. And independence offers us a chance to get off that rail track we're tied to. And the second aspect of it, which you touched on rightly there and Carolyn rightly mentions, is it's not just those that aren't registered, of which it's difficult to pin down the numbers. But look at the last Scottish Parliament elections. 60% voted. And I think that's probably an exaggeration. It maybe wasn't as high as 60, but 40% who are registered didn't vote. They're on the electoral register. They just didn't turn up to the polling station. They couldn't be bothered. Their view, and it's well recorded by John Curtis and others, they'll say, they're all the same. I'm not voting for any of them. They're all a bunch of tossers. I'm not voting for any of them because I don't relate to them. They're all wearing suits. They're all fiddling their expenses on big fat salaries, representing the business classes, and that's no me. And the key, door to unlock for the Yes Scotland campaign in next year is if we can persuade that 40% who are registered, who are on the electoral register, who'll be getting a ballot paper sent through the door, look, this is a life-changing moment. This is the chance to change your life and, frankly, to change the world. And if we can do that, then the polls will change in our favour.
I'll come back to the idea about changing the world in a moment, but do you think we need big voter registration campaigns?
I think it would help. It doesn't do any harm. I mean, clearly Carolyn has touched on people who are not on the register. There's I wouldn't, for one, underestimate the amount of time that takes. These are people who are disenfranchised, feel disenfranchised, turned off by politics, and are really mistrusting of everybody. And it's a tall ask because ultimately, when people come up to me, I'm sure they come up to you in the street and say, oh, if you're doing anything political, that makes you a politician. I mean, politicians, the word politician is a swear word in Scotland. And I say to people, I'm not a politician, no danger, never have been. I've been active in politics for 35 years, but I'm a freedom fighter. I'm a socialist activist, and to me that's a proud thing to be, proud reputation to have. So voter registration is a lot more difficult than it sounds. And I don't feel, I have to be honest, I don't feel that 40% of the population of the country are not registered. I don't know what the proportion is, but I don't think it's anywhere near as big as the 40% who are registered and don't vote. And they, for me, are the low-hanging fruit, if you like to use that analogy between the two.
Yeah, interesting. On what you said earlier about it's a chance to change the world, but we'll start in Scotland and then move to the world. So what would an independent Scotland give us the chance to do? Because, for example, that idea you're saying that, I'm not a politician, and if you're interested in politics, there must be something wrong with you and stuff.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I constantly give is the one from literature, although it was Walter Scott who couldn't possibly be described as an independent supporter. But one of the strongest ideas for having our own independent country is the thing it's best to have our politicians here in Edinburgh where we can throw stones at them because not even the strongest arm can throw as far as London. And I think that's as good a principle as any to be reducing the size of the state that we operate in, if you like, and having an independent Scotland. But what would, apart from the opportunity to throw stones, is a long way to get round to that, but apart from the opportunity to throw stones at them, what opportunities would an independent Scotland give us?
Well, let me take the Walter Scott quote to begin with, because I think it's really good. What he's getting at here is fundamental issues of democracy and accountability. And these are really powerful arguments. I mean, I've, like you, I'm interested in history. I like to read about the past. I've just finished a book about the English Civil War and Cromwell, in that period, famously in England's history, where they'd 40 years without a monarch. Fantastic. I look forward to not having a monarchy and soon Scotland, England, Wales, the rest of it, right? But those desires that Walter Scott's talking about there, that ordinary people have in abundance, is for democracy, and therefore it works better when it's nearby. And accountability, which is, see, these politicians have been fiddling their expenses, and we as the electorate who voted them in can't get rid of them for 5 years. That's no right. These should be instantaneously fired out the door. There should be automatic rights to recall. And is this new? No, I'm afraid not. The new model army, the levellers, they were talking about ideas like this in Cromwell's time. If you read about Burns, it's exactly the same. One of my favourite poems of Robert Burns, he talks about the ballad of Mr. Hearn. And he talks about, in the poem, about how the people in Ayrshire, we'll hae one for among oursel, a man we ken and all that. And what he's getting at is that they'll elect one of their own rather than the toff's son. the landlord's son who somehow inherits the seat, you know.